Hello, 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 and welcome into a special Big Talk college sports with a Midwest perspective. Blue collar, blue blood. I am Sam Sprunger, as always, joined by Tony Hollandsworth. Tony, how are we tonight?
I'm having a great day, Sam. Alabama has been left out of the playoffs. It's a great day in America.
Well,
It's a great day.
we'll talk about those things that we're happy with, things that we might not be too happy with when it comes to the CFP 2024 12-team playoff bracket. It was officially announced this afternoon, where we have a bracket now. Four Big Ten teams made it, Tony. Before we even pull it up the bracket, was there any sort of surprise to that? Were you pretty sure that all four of these teams were in?
Yeah, I was pretty sure. I mean, when they were talking about the fact that none of the conference championship teams were going to be punished or necessarily kicked out after
But yet they teased it that it could happen.
hey, we'll get into that because I have something to add to that, but we'll get into that later. But nonetheless, though, I mean, Oregon is your number one seed. They've been undefeated. They passed every test that they were supposed to beat and pass. They won the Big Ten, so Oregon was for sure going to be in. Is probably a little bit of questions, I would think, for maybe Ohio State, because really their only quote unquote quality win was against a Penn State team, which is better than what most teams
Turned
have
out to
under
be
their
better
belt.
after last night, I can tell you that.
Correct. So they've got that. Penn State, obviously, they're not supposed to be quote unquote punished for losing to Oregon, but they at least kept it closer than what it was going to look like in the first half anyway.
Yeah.
And then Indiana, I mean, Indiana was honestly in the same boat. I mean, they beat everybody that they were supposed to. They have 11 wins. They have one loss to Ohio State. I mean, really none of these teams to me were ever at the point, even when the first CFP committee bracket came out for the 12-team playoffs, I was like, none of these Big Ten teams I'm really worried about being booted out for somebody else, because to me, everybody else, it's like, they either have more losses, which then invalidates what you want to do, or you're really going to have to fight to make an argument of, well, this team deserves to be in more than this team. And can you really say that after a power four team plays a power four schedule and wins 11 out of the 12 games that they play?
Yeah, it was the one thing that I'd seen toyed about was IU maybe not getting in. I was pretty confident they were going to be in. I don't see how you could have taken a 3. I don't care about the schedule. No way a one loss team who has done what IU has done this year should be booted out for a 3-loss team. I wasn't worried about that. But it was toyed that it potentially could have happened. But it didn't. But let's the one thing that I thought maybe could have happened was Ohio State could have dropped to the 9 seed and had to go on the road. That was the only real thing out of the 4 that I thought was maybe the possibility was maybe that loss to Michigan really did hurt the Buckeyes enough to where it took the first round hosting away. But let's take a look at the bracket, because as we can see, it did not hurt the Buckeyes. The 5-12 game, Texas comes in as the 5 seed. Actually, first, let's look at our buys. Let's talk about those buys for a couple of minutes. Oregon, number 1 seed. We even talked about it on Friday that basically at least I felt, whoever won the Penn State-Oregon game was going to be the 1 seed. I really did think that was going to be the thing, because even if Georgia won, but even though they won, they beat a number 5 team or a number 4 team, whereas Penn State would have been beating number 1 and Oregon obviously beating number 3. So that was the better win for them.
Right.
But Oregon, the 1 seed, no surprise at all. A lot closer than some people thought, but I did not envision, and I don't know if you did, the score that came from the Big Ten championship game. But the Ducks come out on top, get the 1 seed. Georgia in at the 2. Does that surprise you at all over a one-loss Boise State team or Arizona State?
Not necessarily, because I think they were looking at it in the same way that a lot of the same way that the AP poll was looking at it. Of the 2 losses that Texas has been both to Georgia, and for the most part, Texas has been pretty much bounced around in the top 4 just about the entire season. I think there's been one instance where they were maybe outside of the top 4, in the top 5 era.
Yeah.
But the fact that, Texas has been the number 1, number 2 team majority of the season, and Georgia has beat them now twice, both in Texas and in a neutral site.
Right.
Well, neutral. It was more or less a home game
Still
for Georgia because it's in
wasn't
Atlanta,
a home
but it's
game.
classified as a
Athens.
neutral game. The fact that they beat Texas twice, the first time in a dominating fashion, this one a little bit more closer, and for the second half, majority with a backup quarterback. I am kind of surprised. There is one thing I do want to ask you, though, on your opinion, that somebody actually brought up on Twitter, X, sorry, that
platform formerly known as Twitter.
Right. That they do kind of bring up a good point about is, remember how last year Florida State got left out of the playoffs because Jordan Travis was hurt and Florida State was down to their 3rd string quarterback. Somebody had made the mention that should Georgia almost fall into that same realm, because from what we can tell so far, from initial perspective of Carson Beck's injury, I'm not going to try to diagnose what I think it is or anything like that. There's talks that Carson Beck might potentially be out, so therefore Georgia would be relying then on their backup quarterback. Should they be penalized for that, though?
I'll say no, and I'll tell you why. What we witnessed, Jordan Travis was hurt in that game in the ACC before the ACC championship. What?
Yeah, just before. It's like 2 games before, if I remember correctly.
Excuse me. And they and I guess that kind of defeats my answer, but I still think no, just for the fact that he still beat Texas in his championship game. The back Stockton, correct?
Yeah.
The backup. They still won.
Yeah.
Granted, he didn't do necessarily everything to win or win it himself, but he sure didn't lose it, and they still ended up winning the game. So I think Carson Beck, that the fact that he had to go in for the last play of the game was just amazing. He's walking out there with an arm hanging and going to do it. And you knew I was telling everybody we were watching with, I said, he's handing this ball off. If I'm Texas, I'm stacking the box with 11. I'm not. He's not throwing this ball.
No, they're done way.
And they ran right up the gut for 6 yards for the touchdown. It just kind of really surprised me. But I think because they won and just kind of who they beat, kind of to me says that okay, they probably took that into consideration. I would sure hope they did. But the committee never ceases to amaze. But
hey, I mean, they had a scenario in which they still debated on technically punishing SMU for losing their conference championship, even though they said they wouldn't, to just put in Alabama. Right. So, I mean,
we'll get to
would
that,
you be
Tony.
surprised?
We'll get to that, Tony, okay? But no, I think with that, I think I see them kind of taking that into consideration of who they beat during that championship, where he played a good majority of it, but didn't start it. Like they didn't come into it thinking and knowing they had this Stockton in. He had to come in on the fly. He performed well enough. I'm not going to say he performed great. I'm not even going to go as far as he played really good. He played well enough. And Georgia ended up winning the game. I think they slot in at 2 pretty well.
And I think you could also make the argument too with Florida State. Those last couple of games, those were really ugly games. Like, yes, the team won it, but they were really ugly. I think for Georgia, now the last few weeks, Carson Beck has actually been a lot sharper than he was for about that 4 week span
Yeah.
there, where he threw 4 touchdowns to 9 interceptions. So
Right.
to me, I think they might have also included the fact that Georgia as a team has rallied well enough together that they could potentially overcompensate for maybe and much to your point, Stockton didn't play a bad game by no stretch of the imagination. For when he had to come in, he led a couple touchdown drives. In all honesty, he ended up leading Georgia ultimately to the win. I think he performed really well and had a complimentary Georgia team to help him along with that.
Yeah, and so I agree, and I think Georgia slots in there well. I wouldn't even have said anything had they made them number 3. Now they put them at number
Yeah.
4. I've got a little bit of a gripe, but
Yeah.
number 3 with Boise State being number 2, absolutely. Boise State lost one game this year, everybody,
Yeah.
and it was to Oregon. So they and don't care if it's they didn't play. They played everybody on their schedule. That's all they can do, these guys who are playing this year have nothing to do with putting that schedule together. They played Oregon to a 3-point standstill, lost by 3 points at the last play.
Yep.
So but they won everything else in front of them, and I think they were a 2 or a 3. I wouldn't have been upset either way had they given Boise. If you flip flop Boise State and Georgia, meh,
Yeah.
nothing
I,
there.
I think the other thing that people probably give gripes to as well is the fact that as of it stands right now, Boise State is a group of 5 school coming from that group of 5 champion,
Yeah.
best of the group of 5, which that's honestly what this was really made for. Was look, it's the top 5 champions.
Correct.
Most of the time we figure it's probably going to be the Power 4 conferences as well as the Group of 5 champion, and myself included. Initially, I thought, okay, well, Boise State, especially if they make it, they're probably going to be that 12 seed, is because they're the Group of 5. Little did I expect or realize that, oh no, that includes, you could have 3 Power 4 champions, and then you have a Group of 5 as your 3 seed. They get a bye, and now your last Power 4 champion in Clemson technically has to go on the road now, even though they don't get a bye. So I think that may be what people have a lot of issues with Boise State, not just who they played, but the fact that they're a group of 5 champion, and they're quote unquote lower than the rest of the teams on here, even though SMU is technically in their first year of being in a Power 4 conference this year.
Yeah, well, I don't care that they're a group of 5. I don't. They to me passed the eye test of they played the number 1 team in the country to a standstill essentially, and it took the last second play to give them the loss. So that to me is they've played what they've passed the eye test to where okay, I don't have an issue with Boise State getting a bye. I do not. Arizona State, I'm not shocked that they got this bye for this tournament. I'll talk about what I have issue with this bracket, and it has to do not because of Arizona State, but because of Arizona State. So that's I'm not blaming Arizona State because I really like Kenny Dillingham. I love him as a coach, but it's because of them that I've got a problem with this bracket going forward. Let's talk about the Big Ten teams in the first 4 games, starting Friday night of December 20th. The first game, IU and Notre Dame, the 10 and 7 seed, going at it in South Bend, Indiana. So the 2 teams from the same state. There's only 2 teams from the same state in the whole bracket. And they play each other the first round. Do you have a problem with that, or did this work out pretty well?
I think this works out pretty well. And I think this is one of those, this is a fairly good test for both. To be honest, I have Notre Dame winning just because of, I think overall talent wise, they're more talented than Indiana is. But I also think that out of all of the matchups, realistically, when I look at this entire first round, I like all of these matchups except for one I'm not a particularly huge fan of, and that's the next one of SMU and Penn State. But with Indiana and Notre Dame, I mean, you have two teams from the same state. Indiana just has to travel like 3 hours up north to face Notre Dame. So they're both acclimated to the cold weather. So really, you're going to get to kind of see the best of both of these teams. And I feel like a lot of the questions that people have with Notre Dame, as far as, they haven't really played anybody. Yes, they beat a ranked Army team who finished 11-1, being Army's only loss. They beat a ranked Navy team, but they lost to NIU. I think if they beat a team like Indiana, who has really been what I would consider the Cinderella story of the college football season so far this year, I think if they beat them, that maybe quiets it a little bit. And I think it kind of helps fuel Notre Dame, because they'll at least say, yeah, we got one playoff win before they have to go take on Georgia.
Yeah. I told you in text yesterday. I said, if that is the matchup, this is like the White Sox and the Cardinals playing in the World Series. I want them to both tie or both lose, if that's at all possible.
Right.
Just let's let Georgia into the semifinals. It's fine. No, when it comes to this game, you prefaced it with, well, but who do you want to lose more?
Right.
It's Notre Dame, and it's not because I don't like their team this year. I just don't like Notre Dame. Never have. I can subjectively. Subjectively, that's correct, right? And not objectively. So subjectively, I can analyze Notre Dame, at least in my mind, to at least think that I'm going to give them at least a fair shake. I just don't want them to win. That's fair. That's my biggest concern is I don't want them to win. But this is, if Notre Dame is as good, I mean, they have the worst loss of all these teams, all of them, including Clemson, and they're 3. Like, they have the worst loss. And they lost that in week 2, right after they beat Texas A&M. They lost week 2 to Northern Illinois, and they haven't lost since. Good on them. It's still a really, really bad loss, and they did it at home. So the precedence of them maybe underperforming at home is not out of the question. Do I think it's going to happen? No, I think Notre Dame's really a good team. They are. I just don't want them to win. But that means then I have to say I want IU to win it. So you can see my conundrum here. But I think it's going to be a pretty good game, honestly, because of that Notre Dame factor. They can underperform if they so choose. And IU's a really good defense. They've got a really strong offense. It's just a matter of, and you can't even say, well, this team's traveling to a cold. They're both cold.
Yeah.
Bloomington and South Bend are both cold. So that's not even an advantage for Notre Dame in my eyes, for the fact that if IU's playing in it, so's Notre Dame. So they've got to both adjust to it. I just think Notre Dame is a better team. So I think it's probably going to be Notre Dame and Georgia in that second round.
I was almost going to ask if you were going to take the very safe Booger McFarland approach and come out and say, at the end of the day, a team from Indiana is going to win and take on Georgia.
Yeah, well, that is an absolute truth.
But I figured you would take that. Be like, I just know a team from Indiana is going to win.
Can we have a tie? That would be great.
I don't think so. I think they got rid of ties in college football like altogether. They just keep playing overtimes until somebody eventually just folds or wins.
So then on the 21st of December, we're gonna just brush upon Texas Clemson. They're the first game on Saturday. Who goes to play Arizona State? It's hard not to take Texas.
Yeah, I think Texas. This is also going to be the only warm weather matchup as compared to the other 3. Everybody has to travel north and play in the cold.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think with Clemson, I mean, their very last game before this, they got beat by South Carolina. At one point, they were actually handling SMU pretty well,
Mm-hmm.
but then end up coming away with the victory at the very last second to beat SMU.
Mm-hmm.
I still have a lot of questions on both teams. I have more questions about, can Dabo Sweeney and Clemson potentially beat a NIL and transfer portal built Texas that Dabo Sweeney refuses to use? And I know a lot of people give him a lot of grief for that, and I
A lot
know
of Clemson fans that give him grief for
a lot of
that.
Clemson fans too. They're getting kind of aggravated about that because they see the potential that you can
Right.
do when you just supplement. You don't have to completely fill your roster, but supplement your positional needs with top talent out of the portal and whatnot. I think that will come back to bite him in the butt. In all honesty, from what we've seen from Texas, outside of having to face Georgia, they can beat everybody that's on their schedule.
Sure. Yeah. 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 Everybody but Georgia. I misspoke too, by the way. This is the second game on the 21st. Right now, the opening line is Texas -11 on that
Oof.
one. The other one, IU Notre Dame. That's Notre Dame by -8. The early betting on that.
Okay.
So Clemson, Texas, they play at 4 on TNT and Max on the 21st. The first game is 11 seeded SMU, 6 seeded Penn State. They're on TNT and Max. Right now, Penn State 8.5-point favorite. That seems about right. But I wouldn't necessarily completely forget about SMU.
Here's the thing that I have a couple issues with this, and this is going to
With
lead me to
this
go
matchup or with one of the teams in it?
more with the matchups.
Okay.
And I think for me, this is Penn State's like ultimate goal right here. And I say that because you remember how I mentioned a couple weeks ago on Big Talk that, is it potentially time for Penn State to talk about getting
Yeah.
rid of James Franklin?
Yep.
Because he can keep it close in the big games, but he can't finish. And there's an analyst on CBS that pointed this out when he was talking about the bracket, that he thinks right now Penn State has an absolute water slide path to the semifinals with who they face right now, because he thinks for the first matchup with SMU having to travel to Happy Valley, it's a Dallas, Texas team coming up here into the north into Pennsylvania where it's going to be really, really flipping cold. And
it's an 11 o'clock start.
I don't know how well they're going to be able to do with that. And for everything that is Penn State and for all the woes that they have, on paper, they're the more talented team than SMU. So theoretically, they should come out with the victory.
Should.
Doesn't mean it's going to happen, but they should. And again, as compared to the other sample sizes that we have with SMU, they lost to a ranked BYU team at the time, and then they lost to a Clemson team as well. It's their only 2 losses they've had all season. I don't know if they can overcome Penn State having a home field advantage. Now, with Penn State then moving on to Boise State, I feel like it would really, the weather at least then becomes a non-factor, because Idaho is, if anything, Idaho is colder than Pennsylvania is, especially in the wintertime. But again, by talent margin wise, Penn State is more talented than Boise State. So again, theoretically, they should win. But like you said, I wouldn't be surprised if SMU maybe doesn't try to prepare for a little bit, because they still have a couple weeks before this happens. So they have time to prepare and potentially get acclimated to this and be able to deal with it. So to me, this is Penn State's big moment. If they win, they can say, okay, look, we won our first round of the playoffs. We're going to the quarterfinals. James Franklin then can say, okay, I have a big win under my belt, at least in the recent future. I have a big win under my belt. But then can he do that against, the 3 seed of Boise State or not? That to me is my, not necessarily issue, but my kind of conundrum with this. This is the only matchup I'm like, I don't know how I feel about this one.
Yeah, one thing I can absolutely say is it had to be SMU. It really did.
Yes.
We'll get into that even in just a few minutes because we're just getting done with these first 4 games. But it absolutely had to be these guys. It would have sullied a lot of what was seemingly great about this tournament if it hadn't been
Yes.
them. So let's look at the last game of the first 4. It's at the Horseshoe in Columbus. The 8th-seeded Ohio State Buckeyes take on the 9-seeded Tennessee Volunteers, the only SEC team to go on the road, mister.
Yep.
And they've got to go up north to play in seemingly, probably in seeing that for the last 3 weeks in the Midwest, the temperatures have been in the 20s.
Yep.
You can only think they're going to get colder.
Yep. Yeah, this is another one I'm a little bit torn, but believe it or not, I have Tennessee actually winning this one. And I say that because of the most recent matchup that Ohio State had just with Michigan. And I think and also kind of what we saw with Oregon as well, Ohio State actually has a really big problem stopping the run.
Yeah.
And Sampson, the running back for Tennessee, has had an absolutely phenomenal year. And we even saw Khalil Mullings run over Ohio State in this last matchup that they had. The thing that also makes me a little worried that Ohio State didn't have to worry about with Michigan is the passing game. Tennessee has a significantly better passing game than Michigan does. And so we might even potentially see a better or real similar matchup to that first one with Ohio State and Oregon out of Ohio State and Tennessee. I do kind of wonder, though, how much does the weather affect the Volunteers going into the Horseshoe and in an environment that is really hard to play in because of the amount of Buckeye fans that are going to be there. They're going to be pumped. And realistically, the same thing I said for James Franklin could be said for Ryan Day is he going to be able to win the big game? Because realistically, right now, as it stands, you're going to have everything in your favor. You're playing at home in Columbus. You're hosting them. It's in a cold weather game that Ohio State's used to playing. And you've had an extra time off because you didn't have to play in the championship game. You're going to have even more time off coming up to this. You have all but every chance to prepare for what you're doing. You should be able to get a victory and then move on to take Oregon on for the second time this season. Should.
Well, the Buckeyes are a -7.5 point favorite. I think if you are correct and Tennessee wins this game, Ryan Day is no longer the coach at Ohio State. I really do believe that if the Buckeyes fall in that first round game, that would be 2 straight games at home that you lost, one being to that the college up north. And excuse me, that they're drawing the line somewhere. You need to have some success. You need to maybe even, and I'm not saying that I would definitely say that's etched in stone, but you might even need to beat Oregon in order to
save his job.
So
yeah.
I think it's pretty important that they don't lose this if Ryan Day wants to keep his job longer. I think if they lose a second game in a row at home, that maybe we're looking at the Ohio State University looking for a new football head coach.
Hey, if they put it on Indeed, I'm hiring. I just took my dynasty team in NCAA 25 to another national title victory. So I'm just saying I do have some qualifications, but no, I mean, you and I also talked about that a couple weeks ago when we talked about James Franklin, in that kind of initial matchup with Ohio State and Penn State. This is really both of these coaches have really struggled when it comes to big wins. Now, Ryan Day hasn't struggled facing against Penn State, but he struggled against Michigan. And even though he's kept it close against almost every team he's faced in the college football playoffs over the years, he's almost always come up short. So I think you're 100% right. I think if he even remotely wants to try to keep his job, but I still think even if he does, he comes in still on the hot seat. He has to beat Tennessee. He then has to go technically on the road and beat Oregon. And then at minimum, he has to make it to the semifinals. I don't think he necessarily would have to win the semifinals to keep his job. I think if he gets there, he can make the argument of, look, I have 2 top 10 quality wins in the college football playoffs. I can win the big game. I think it saves his job, but I think it would only save it for 1 more year. Now, unless he wins a national title, then he probably gets another couple years, but I don't know if I see Ohio State going that far.
Oh, that's a tough one. That's a tough draw for Ohio State.
Mm-hmm.
That is a very tough draw. But I'll be darned if that isn't a tough draw for Oregon too, and they're the number 1 team in the bracket. So, okay, so let's broaden it. Let's take a look at the whole bracket. What are your issues with this bracket?
It honestly seems like to me that Oregon and whoever wins between Tennessee and Ohio State is really going to me, be the closest matchups. To me, say hypothetically, all of our predictions come true. So let's say Texas goes on and take on Arizona State. I think Texas wins that pretty wholeheartedly with no issues. So they move on to the semifinals.
Nothing against you, Arizona State. Ease up.
Right. It just is what it is.
It is what it is on that.
You're probably the other, and some people might even put you more in that Cinderella college football story because you were supposed to be dead last in the Big 12, and then you come out, you not only win the Big 12, you dominate Iowa State to win the Big 12 at that. So to me, Texas moves on to the semifinals. You move on to the next, you move past Tennessee and Ohio State versus Oregon. You have SMU versus Penn State. Penn State should win that. Then I think they more than likely win against Boise State.
And they should win into the
semifinals. And then you've got Notre Dame and Indiana. I think Notre Dame wins that. And then I think, unfortunately, Notre Dame gets crushed by Georgia. So then you have Georgia versus Penn State in the semifinals. Georgia probably moves on to the national championship after that. And then really the big question after that is the top of the bracket, because who goes on to face Oregon, and then who wins out of those 2 matchups to then take on Texas. And heck, could we potentially have, because I mean, all honesty, and you and I talked about this on Friday with Big Talk, that there's a little bit of like a WWE essence to it. Like there's that little bit of a script, like, you know what we really need? Georgia versus Texas part 3. Can Texas finally do it when it matters most? Can they win a national title and come back to prominence by beating the team that has beat them 2 times in a season and win it all when it matters most?
Is that hat lined with foil?
Huh?
Is that hat lined with foil there?
Yeah,
really?
It keeps the government from reading my thoughts.
So your biggest issue is that Tennessee, Ohio State feeding into Oregon.
Yeah, because to me, that is probably all 3 of those matchups. Tennessee to Ohio State, to me, is such a coin flip. Like, I feel like that could go either way for either team. And then, honestly, even as it moves into the quarterfinals, I feel like whoever even wins out of that, whether it's Tennessee or Ohio State, I feel like that could be a coin flip between either one. To me, that middle bracket right there is the only one that I'm like, wow, this is going to be a really close game. All the other ones, to me, I'm like, there is an obvious favorite in every single one.
And all 4 of them will be close.
Yes, literally. Every single one of them.
Well, my biggest issue with this is along the same lines. How did Oregon end up the number 1 seed and end up with the toughest route to the semifinals? Yes. That's not damning any of the teams that feed into the other 3, but it's the absolute truth when you look at it. They should. So my biggest problem with this is that, but that is what leads me to my overall and overarching biggest problem with this bracket is that those first round buys shouldn't be guaranteed to a conference champion. It just shouldn't be. Yep. Because, you know what? Arizona State's not the 4th best team in this bracket, period. No. Boise State, to me, is not the 3rd best team in this bracket.
No.
I just don't believe it. And if you had to twist my arm, it would be Oregon, Georgia, Texas, and Penn State in the top four. Those would be my 4 buys. It shouldn't matter if you're a conference champion. You're in the dance. It got you into the dance automatically. That is my biggest problem. And I think probably in a couple of years, once they've, because this was a good way to start in theory. And now that they're working it and they're like, oh my gosh. And again, Arizona State, not a knock on you. But you being the 4 seed exposes a huge flaw with the guaranteed bye rule because they're not the 4th best team.
It honestly, it reminds me of another Cinderella team that came out of the Big 12. It reminds me of the TCU thing that while the story is great and while, yes, they beat some teams they probably shouldn't have and they got some quality wins, like much to your point, it was one of those when push comes to shove, like if what we say is true and they have to face Texas, Texas is going to have an absolute walk in the park all over Arizona State. And essentially you've all but wasted a first round bye because they won a conference championship.
Yeah. And that, and you know what? It's almost detrimental to Oregon that they have a bye week before they play either Tennessee or Ohio State, who is going to have a week of the rust already being knocked off, didn't have a chance to really gather. It's already knocked off, though, and they're coming in to play Oregon in the Rose Bowl.
And you had best believe, too, if you're Tennessee or Ohio State, that's a big momentum game. Because, like I said, because both of these teams are looking at each other like, oh, crap, these are both 2 really good teams that have beat other good teams. You talk about talent, you talk about some of the biggest brands, and have both been really good the last couple of years. I mean, that's going to be a momentum swing. And much to your point, they don't have to worry about coming off the bye week. They don't have to worry about that rust. They're going to have a lot of that momentum on their side going into that game against Oregon.
Yeah, it's that would be why I have the biggest issue with this. That, or they either just seed as is, or if they keep this after the first round, you reseed. So those guys are the 5-12, 9-8, but you reseed them and put the highest seed. So if Clemson beats Texas, they're not playing Arizona State. They're going to play Oregon.
Right.
Because then it's a little, they still are coming off a bye. It's just like NFL. And let's be as honest as we possibly can. This is NFL light.
Yes.
It's every bit of for the money. So why wouldn't you want your number 1 team getting the worst seeded team in the playoff working forward? If that Cinderella team, guess what? You got into the dance. You've got to pull a rabbit out of your hat against the 5 seed. You know what? Your reward is A, you get to keep playing, and B, you get to go play the 1 seed.
Correct.
Now, once you've reseeded into that, you play it as is. Just those initial 4 winners, reseed those guys and have them go play. Nothing's set in stone here anyways.
Right.
Because it's either Clemson or Texas against Arizona State. So couldn't it be the lowest seed goes and plays Oregon, and so on and so forth? It's the easiest way to do it if you're going to keep this. But if not, reseed everybody and just say, okay, this is the way it plays out.
Well, and plus, much to your point, why does it, like you said, why does Oregon almost get punished for this? Because if you look at it, if they have to face Tennessee or Ohio State, they have to face the 8 or 9 seed. Say Texas loses, hey, Arizona State, here's a reward. You technically get to face the 12 seed. Same with Boise State. Say SMU takes the win. Oh man, we get to face the 11th seed. Easy. And same with Georgia. I mean, oh hey, we get to face Indiana if they upset Notre Dame. Cakewalk in the park. I do agree. This to me, it's like they took the NFL light, but all honesty, they should almost look to literally just right across the road in college basketball as far as how they do their seedings and whatnot of, okay, this is who you're going to face.
If this were just seeded as is, you would have probably Arizona and IU maybe playing in that 8-9 game. feeding into Oregon. Which matchup is more fair to the 1 seed? And I say fair because you know what? You gotta buy. So that part you get to get better. You get to heal and take some time to rejuvenate a little bit. But
Right.
still, you seed them as is. You might have IU Arizona State playing in that, which is a good matchup.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good matchup.
It's two Cinderella
And
stories.
they feed into Oregon. Okay, well that makes a little bit more sense. Now that team's going to have a game in, and they've got to win, but they still have to play Oregon.
And think about it too. If they're because they're and we talked about this last year when we talked about Florida State getting snubbed out.
Yeah.
Their biggest worry is another TCU going in, and we have a national championship that ends 63-7 because a team that shouldn't have been in there. Hey, they got the win against Michigan, so I mean they did get a quality win.
If SMU makes it to the national championship game and gets housed by Oregon, hey, you know what? SMU had to win 3 games to get there. They deserve to be there.
But I mean, for realistically, if you want to potentially eliminate even that first round, because I mean, there's a lot of people that I've even seen on TikTok that are arguing, Indiana really shouldn't be in there, Arizona State shouldn't be in there. Much to your point, why not have them face them?
Has to be in there. They have to be. They won the Big 12. They get an automatic bid. It doesn't matter if they were, had 4 losses. Clemson's in. Yeah. They lost 3 times. They have to be. So don't, and I'm not saying you are. I'm talking to the everybody else of people. Don't do that.
Yeah.
If you're going to have an argument, don't be wrong in one of your examples that you're using. Like seriously, Arizona State has to be.
Yes.
Has to.
Yeah. Because think about it, had they knocked Arizona State down and put Clemson there, everything would have gone. It would have gone nuts. It would have been the same thing if they knocked SMU out and put Alabama in. That would completely destroy any validity and everything that they have been telling us for the last 4 months as far as how this is going to work. That would have destroyed all of it.
Well, and that's why I think they missed the mark on that. The automatic conference champion, top 4 conference champions get the bye. Let's just let the top 4 teams.
Yeah,
you've got a committee. Figure that out. You can't tell me that committee knows that Arizona State's the 4th best team in the country, because they're not.
Right. Well, and I think a lot of that ties into, and there's been a few people that have even suggested that this will probably start to be worked on as soon as the first round is completed.
Well, 2026 is they're already saying there's going to be changes to what this is coming from this.
Right. Because there's already a lot of those rumors and talks that the Big Ten and the SEC want automatic bids for their teams, not necessarily for their conference champions, but for their team.
I think that's ridiculous, because you're saying, well, the Big Ten's got to have 4 in. Well, what if they've got only 2 really, really good teams that are playoff worthy?
Correct.
Not likely, since there's 18 teams, but still, what if there's not?
But if they're and hell, heck, look at how much the SEC has been hailed and praised all these years. The SEC has not looked good this year, and I mean, heck, they only have 3 teams in the playoffs as it stands right now.
Yeah, and that's and because there are 4 teams from the Big Ten in here over the 3 from the SEC, that doesn't mean that the SEC isn't maybe the better of the conferences overall through and through. That's just saying the top of the Big Ten was a little bit better than the top of the SEC this year.
Correct.
Okay, so before we wrap up here, or as we wrap up here, what did the committee get right then, Tony?
They kept Alabama out. They absolutely kept Alabama out. That's the best thing, because much like we were talking about, and believe it or not, Paul Finebaum pointed this out, that had they not done this, it would have caused so many issues and started so many fires in the college football world. If you put Alabama in over SMU, what does that do? That invalidates your whole, you're not going to be punished if you lose a conference championship thing. 2, teams aren't going to play in your conference championship, because all honesty,
that would have been the biggest thing.
Because if I'm that, let's take Oregon and Penn State, for example. or honestly, you could even go as far as Clemson and SMU. For SMU, they're like, look, we were in before we played this. And then we played an extra game to win this championship and we lost. And now we're out for Alabama. We're just,
Who didn't
nobody's going
even
to play
play
again.
for their championship.
Correct. So why are we getting the boot out for an extra game that you said we weren't going to be, penalized for if we lost?
Mm-hmm.
But yet a team that didn't have to do that gets in purely because of their name and their brand. And well, they beat the SEC champion who beat the snot out of the ACC champion at the beginning of the year.
But they also lost by 3 touchdowns in Norman
to Oklahoma. Exactly.
We're not going there.
So that to me is what they did right. But the fact that they even had that scenario as a backup plan of, well, we could potentially make an argument that Bama should be in over SMU. The fact that you even had that, there was a guy I saw on TikTok Live pointed this out. While the BCS computer had a lot of its faults, it's better than a college football committee that only wants this off of brand, off of emotion, off of past success, and the most important thing, network ratings, which generate more revenue.
Yes. Alabama is not the one thing, but one of the things the committee absolutely got right. They would have set themselves behind they would have sunk the 8 ball on by accident,
mm-hmm.
and ended this CFP 12 game just like that. 12 team bracket done right away.
Yep.
Because they would have totally invalidated what they preached and preached and preached and preached and preached. You will not be punished for a loss in your conference championship. Yep. It is a loss. It will go on your record. Yes, all of that. Now, that's not to say you won't maybe drop in some seeding. But if you were in the playoffs at the time you were going into your conference championship and you lose, you are still going to be in that playoff. Had they dropped SMU to the 13th best team and put Alabama in, they're not valid ever again.
Nope.
Ever again. And you're absolutely right. If SMU would have been like, well, if we would have known that, we wouldn't have played. We just wouldn't have played because it's not a mandatory game.
Right. And Clemson needed that game more than SMU. And if I was SMU, that would be my argument. Yeah, that would be my argument if I'm SMU. Be like, look, I don't need this game. I'm already in. Clemson needed it. I don't need this. You want to put Clemson in? Have Clemson and Alabama face off. They can take the last spot. We don't need this.
Right. Which this just begs to they're going to expand it to 16. They're gonna. It's just a matter of time. They'll add 4 more in, and they'll have a 16-team tournament before too long. I wouldn't say as early as 2026. I would say by the time we hit 2030, though, we're looking at a 16-team tournament at the end of the season.
I think so. And honestly, I could even because I remember they talked about that before this was finally released, if they wanted to do it to 12 or if they wanted to bump it all the way up to 16.
Yep.
Because I think had they done this, had they kicked SMU out, they could be like, well, we already have a 3-loss team in there, and it would open the door.
But it wouldn't have been an automatic bid. Or not an automatic bid, a large bid. It would have been it's an automatic bid. That's the only reason there's a 3-loss team.
Correct.
Only.
And I think what they have to realize too, and this is where I think they start to go a little bit crazy, is because you have a 12-team playoff right now, you can have a team in there with 3 losses. What they need to realize is that is okay. You don't necessarily have to make an exception or make an argument like, man, we really need to. Alabama went like 8-4 hypothetically, so God, we just got to get Bama in there. Like no, yes, you can make the argument for Miami that they lost games they shouldn't have. They they trailed in games that they shouldn't have. Right. You can make all of those arguments you want. As the committee, you have to stop trying to make excuses to get, I'm not going to say their favorite teams, but they're money babies into a college football playoff. Like you have to pick the 12 best teams. And I know, Nick Saban, much to your chagrin, has come out and contradicted himself because he says, "Oh, they're the 12 best team." Well, when you lose to Vanderbilt, then you go into Norman and you lose by 3 touchdowns, you don't probably deserve to be in there. You're 100% correct. You don't
However,
deserve to
in the
be in
same
there.
breath, he says, "But that's going to make people stop playing good teams in the."
Which I'll say this because
You
somebody
lost your games in the SEC. Be quiet.
Which, funny enough, I almost forgot about that. I'm glad you said that. So this is an actual tweet from Greg Byrne. I probably misenunciated that. He's the athletic director from Alabama. This was his post on X. Disappointed with the outcome, and we felt we were one of the 12 best teams in the country. We had an extremely challenging schedule and recognized there were 2 games in particular that we did not perform as well as we should have. We have said that we would need to see how the strength of schedule would be evaluated by the CFP. With this outcome, we will need to assess how many Power 4 non-conference games make sense in the future to put us in the best position to participate in the CFP. That is not good for college football. With that said, we do not need to hang our heads, and we need to finish the season strong. We have a great group of young men who have led us with Coach DeBoer through the last year, and we are looking forward to our opportunity in the ReliaQuist Bowl. Now, funny enough, readers and whatnot commented back. All of Alabama's losses came in conference play. Alabama's non-conference schedule was one of the easiest in the country, playing 2 Group of 5 schools in Western Kentucky and USF, 1 FCS school, and 1 Power 4 team, the 5-7 Wisconsin Badgers, who finished 12th in the Big Ten. To me, when Nick Saban said that, they really need to look at who we play and if these non-conference teams, and non-conference games matter because we're scheduled to play.
Mr. Saban.
Like, because we play Florida State, we play UConn, and I'm like, no. You cannot sit here and tell me, oh, we need to reevaluate if we need to face UConn. Yes, you do. Because if I'm the committee, if I had half a brain and I was the committee, and I'm looking at Alabama's schedule, like, oh, well, who did you face overall? Okay, you faced this SEC schedule. Oh, who else did you face? Oh, we beat up Mercer. We beat up UConn. We beat up UMass. And we beat up South Dakota State.
We lost to Vanderbilt.
But we lost to Vandy.
Yeah.
Like, okay, cool. You beat absolutely nobody outside of the SEC. Cool, other than Wisconsin. So, to me, Nick Saban needs to realize, while yes, you're probably going to face teams that you may beat because you don't face them very often. And that is kind of the beauty of this playoffs, is you'll face them more and more because these games start to matter. You can't sit here and tell me, oh, well, we need to rethink if we need to face a team like Florida State, or we need to rethink if we need to go up and play the Buckeyes in Columbus. No, you absolutely need to play those because, again, if, say, you're out, you can validate it by saying, hey, we took down one of the top teams in the Big Ten. Yes, you did. Now you can have an argument for being in, not just, oh, we beat up Georgia, who we faced, 5 or 6 times in the last, 6 years. Like, you're used to seeing them. They are a regular conference opponent, not a team that you face very sparingly as it stands right now.
They're a common opponent because most of the time you're playing in the championship game against one another.
Correct.
Or you're in the playoffs playing against one another.
Correct.
So I mean, like, you're right. That opponent, you see them so much that they start getting, they're common. Like they're like, how to prepare for them with slight wrinkles year in and year out. But yeah,
you're right.
But his big fine. Expand your conference schedule out to 10.
Right.
So everybody gets 2 little cupcakes and goes, and so those aren't even taken into consideration then.
Right.
What do you do in your conference schedule? You know what? You're going to lose all of your games. You're going to lose 3 games then, too.
Yep.
Maybe even 4.
Maybe.
Because you only play 8.
Yep.
So his argument of, the best 12 best, I think they got it right, the 12 best teams. But you don't believe that.
No.
Or you wouldn't be sitting here making excuses. And I get it. He's posturing for the university that he just got done. DeBoer was doing the same thing for Alabama. You had Kiffin doing it for Ole Miss. You had I forget the coach's name for South Carolina. Beamers.
Oh yeah, Beamers.
Beamer was doing it. So I get it. I do get it to a certain extent. But your argument is that you beat Georgia. I get it.
But that's it. That's the only good team you really beat, because everybody else that you
on that, and I get it.
Because
that's your hanging hat thing, but no,
because everybody else you beat is either outside of the playoffs with you. So obviously you didn't beat that good of teams because they're not in either. And you'll have one quality loss to a team that is in, and then you lost to two other teams that are 500, maybe one game better than 500.
Oklahoma finished 6-6.
They're going bowling.
And
they take on Navy, if I remember correctly.
I don't remember what Vandy did. Were they 5-7?
I think they were 7-5.
Were they 7-5? Okay,
I think so.
I thought I saw a 7 and a 5 with them. So yeah, you got beat by two bowl teams, yes, but you were embarrassed by a 6-6 team. Embarrassed by them. So, yes. You know what? Your loss goes not near as bad as Notre Dame's one loss. Even if you combined all three of your losses, that's bad because you did 3 times. You ended up with less points than the other team. Mm-hmm. Notre Dame only did it once. It was a bad loss, but they only did it once. And but those two are probably, I don't know. That Vandy loss was just Oklahoma 3 touchdowns. That was embarrassing for the way Oklahoma played.
To me, because they like to measure wins differently, they also like to measure losses differently. And because the committee likes to take into account a lot of history, especially recent history, let's look at the recent history. Vanderbilt has been crap. 4 years. Mm-hmm. They've been crap. They haven't beat Alabama since 1985. And they did it this year by 5.
Right.
Now, Oklahoma historically over the last few years, they've been pretty good. They've been, 8-5. They've been, 10-3. There's even a couple times they almost made the playoffs. Just missed it.
Baker Mayfield took them to the playoffs.
Yeah. Baker Mayfield. I mean, Jalen Hurts did really well with them. I think he got him to just outside of the playoffs, if I remember correctly, that year. Kyler Murray, the same thing. So, I mean, they did really well historically. Now, they've had a bad incoming season to the SEC. They went 6-6, but they beat the snot out of you in their house by 3 touchdowns. Only team that has done that in a hot minute. And so you can't sit here and tell me that, the losses don't matter because we beat Georgia. Like I said, for anybody who doesn't follow me on TikTok, I'll say the same thing on here that I said on my TikTok. If you want to look at the whole, it matters who you play. Okay, Nick Saban. So that means every SEC team has to play the exact same schedules. That way you can always do head-to-head matchups. You can always do that. Okay. Well, let's look at Ole Miss, because Ole Miss played 2 of the same opponents that you did. They played Georgia, which Ole Miss beat Georgia by 18. You beat them by 7. You can look at Ole Miss played Oklahoma. They beat them by 12. You lost by 21. There's your whole, strength of schedule, who you play matters. Yeah. Ole Miss beat the same 2 teams that you played, but you went 1-1 against those teams. Ole Miss went 2-0. And they also have 2 bad losses. Technically 3, if you want to count the fact that LSU isn't ranked anymore, but LSU finished 8-4. But they also lost to Kentucky and Florida. You lost to a ranked Tennessee team, but you lost to Vandy and you got your butt kicked by Oklahoma. Woe tide.
Anyways. Well, that wraps up our CFP 2024 playoff bracket breakdown by Tony and myself. Be on the lookout for I'm really happy that we were able to have this hour-long stream. Didn't plan that, but be on the lookout for this to come out through the Lounge Sports Network and Lounge Media Group here probably in the morning. But then Tony and I will be back on Friday with the breakdown of what Big Ten teams are going bowling and what they're doing and who they're playing and all that fun stuff. So be on the lookout Friday morning at 9 a.m. on the ASAP Network on Lounge Media Group's Facebook page for the time being. But be on the lookout for all that next on Friday. Thanks for tuning in for our CFP 2024 college football playoff bracket and our initial reactions to the news. So for Tony Hollinsworth, I'm Sam Springer. We'll see you on Friday.